Welcome on in a jam-packed Monday episode of the Locked On Syracuse podcast. We got a preview Brown because fingers crossed, it looks like Syracuse is going to return to the basketball court tonight. If you are listening on Monday, there's Cornell back on the schedule yet again, as there's been some COVID complications with Georgia Tech. And also the Virginia coaches are coming over. It seems like reports are starting to leak out about that. So we'll get all our thoughts on all those different things on the Locked On Syracuse podcast right now.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We welcome you on in. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen every single weekday. Only place for daily SU pods. We're here with you Monday through Friday. Hope everyone had a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Tim, Leonard, Tyler Aki, who are with you today. And today's episode brought to you by Sonos. Sonos is the official sponsor of ESPN College Football. Go to Sonos.com to learn more. And I guess we start with the football news, Ty. We will get into Brown and everything that relates to that game, but it is official. We've talked a lot about this on previous podcasts already, but now Robert Anae and Jason Beck, maybe I shouldn't say it is official because Syracuse hasn't officially announced it, but it looks like, barring some crazy turn of events here, these guys are going to be working for Syracuse.
We've seen it happen.
We have, yes, Zach Arnett. So maybe I shouldn't be so quick to jump to the gun here, but it does feel like things are trending in the right direction, and we felt like after Pete Thamel said they were targeting Syracuse, there was some reason to believe that they were probably coming. But now it appears after Virginia is not having their bowl game due to some COVID complications, and Jason Beck, who was supposed to be the offensive coordinator for that game, at least be calling the plays for that game, seems to have kind of made his intentions known now through some reports and stuff that he and Robert and I are coming to Syracuse next year.
Yeah, it's a good hire. And again, we kind of have laid it out a little bit. I'm a little shocked that this was the hire that was made. You definitely feel like you punched above your weight with bringing both of these guys in. I think the one thing that I would have liked to see Beck call those plays in the Fenway Bowl for Virginia, just to get a feel for it. And just so you can kind of see what he's working with. Now, I guess he's not going to be the offensive coordinator. He's not going to be the one calling plays per se when he comes to Syracuse, but you kind of want to get a feel for what your different guys, what your different personnel is like on the coaching staff as well. I think it would have been cool to see that. But again, the one troubling thing for me with these hires is that who knows what the timeline's like, right? Like, you have to turn this thing around pretty quickly if you want to have long-term, like a long-term outlook on this team. And who knows, maybe the next coaching staff that comes in after Dino, if Dino does end up getting to the year, maybe they decide to keep on Beck and Anae. But it's one of those things where usually when you see a new coach come in, you see the whole staff go cleaned out.
Yeah, I am really excited, though, for the points that you laid out, how going into this whole process, I would have guessed it was going to be maybe a group of five, a MAC type of hire, that type of situation. And I'm happy that Dino went outside of his tree and outside of the family, so to speak, his web of guys he knows. And I think this is exciting because when Dino has been at Syracuse, we have not matched up the offensive coordinator being good with the defensive coordinator being good. And we have a good defensive coordinator. I think we all agree in Tony White. And now you go and get at least a guy that was coming over from Virginia after a really strong season there. I would say scale of like 1 to 10, I'm at about a 9 on how excited I am for this hire right now. And I think really the way the offseason has gone has been pretty solid for Syracuse. Sure, a lot of players have left, but hopefully maybe now you can maybe add some Virginia bodies as well. I saw a couple freshman quarterbacks enter the portal. Who knows? But it'd be nice to maybe add some guys that know Anae and Beck as well.
And I think the other thing with bringing these guys in, hopefully they can hang around for a little bit, because that's obviously the hope when you bring in a new coach like this. But they have been recruiting that DMV area too. When you look at the base that Virginia works out of, that's a good thing. And to have that sort of footprint, that's something that Syracuse has been stressing as of late. Get into Maryland and Virginia and DC, because that's a hotbed that isn't tapped into as much as it should be for a program like Syracuse that has that sort of proximity to it.
Yeah. We had some more thoughts on that on some podcasts last week. And I do find it interesting that it seems like the Virginia fan base as a whole, and we even had someone tweet at us about this, they don't like Anae, but everyone raves about Beck. So it seems like Anae's personality didn't really mesh there at Virginia. He's a serious guy, and the administration and all that were sort of fed up with him. So I don't know. I think I'm a little more cautious about Anae, which is interesting because he's the guy who is the offensive coordinator and usually the guy that you don't get someone that's a high profile hire to come to Syracuse and be a quarterback coach. So that part is sort of weird about this. But like I said, I think 1 to 10, it's probably a 9 is how I feel right now. Would you say you're a little bit lower than that?
No, I'm like 8, 9. Like, listen, I'm happy.
Exciting.
It's just the frustrating part is will the coordinator timeline match up with the head coach? Right? Like you hear about it all the time in the NFL, like getting the GM and the head coach on the same timeline, right? And if you kind of mismatch those, then sometimes you run into problems. And I think it's important that when you're bringing in new assistants, especially when the assistants aren't being elevated, right? Like you fired Sterling Gilbert. It'd be one thing if Sterling Gilbert shot the lights out and went to a bigger program and a bigger job, but you're bringing in someone because you had to fire someone. That means something's going wrong. And when all that's sort of happening, then your job, you're going to be on the hot seat the entirety of next season. That to me is the one troubling thing. But hey, maybe some head coach comes in, sees and maybe it's not Anae that stays. Maybe they really like what's happening with Jason Beck. And Beck comes to Syracuse, maybe likes the area. I don't know what his family situation is like, but maybe he has kids, wants to settle them down or whatever in one area for more than a year. That's another thing that maybe comes into play too.
Yeah, they definitely have a great track record, the two of them, of developing quarterbacks. So good news for Garrett Schrader, Justin Lamson. Yeah, that's huge right now because that was the missing piece of our team last year. Defense was fine in spots, and I know a lot of people listening to this podcast know all about it. But the other news that came out yesterday, so on Sunday, Georgia Tech is out. That game has been canceled, basically. And Cornell is taking their spot in the same time slot, December 29th, 7 p.m., is the tip for that game. So Cornell, who we were supposed to play on December 21st, is now going to come to the Dome. Jimmy Boeheim's going to get to play his old team, at least as it stands right now. And ACC play is just going to have to wait a little bit, I guess. Yeah, and again, I like the fact that they're going to get some tune-up games here. It's a little bit different, though, now because you've got 3 games in a week. But hopefully you can get out to some big leads in these games, too, and rest some guys and get some developmental minutes. Again, we've talked about this time and time again, how important that 2-game stretch of what was previously going to be, Lafayette and then Cornell, that 2-game stretch, or was it Lehigh? Right. Lehigh and then Cornell. That 2-game stretch was going to be very big for a guy like Benny Williams and maybe a Frank Anselm or a Samir Torrance. Getting those developmental minutes in, getting a little bit of confidence built. That way, when you head into ACC play, you're not going to feel like you're being thrown to the wolves per se. And I know they've already played in some big games, but this is a confidence building portion of the season, at least for the Monday and the Wednesday of this week. Then on Saturday, when Virginia comes to town, that's when the big boys are coming out. And I know Virginia's struggling and Syracuse should be able to take care of that Virginia team, but you want to have guys that are playing confident. You want to be able to have a rotation that stretches deeper than 6 guys. No doubt. All right, we'll get into Brown in just a second, all the particulars on them, and start to look ahead to that matchup. But this holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or even better than a candy bar. It's a Built Bar filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavor, covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, and also high in protein. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. So many flavors you'll have a hard time choosing. We have raspberry or mint brownie, cherry or double chocolate, cookies and cream, or peanut butter brownie. That's one of my favorites. Anything peanut butter, anything chocolate on the Built Bars is always delicious. It's so good. Like so many of the other treats they have too. They even have the marshmallowy treats, which that's kind of my personal favorite. At the end of the year, those marshmallow treats have really I've been ordering a lot more of those because they are still really good for you somehow and have all the sort of fluffy, marshmallowy through and through flavoring. They're covered in chocolate. So go over to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off all over at built.com. So diving into Brown a little bit now, and a little bit better team than they would have seen. Now you go from, like you said, Lehigh Cornell to Brown Cornell. It makes your schedule and all that a little bit tougher because Brown, KenPom 164, their net ranking currently 128. Syracuse, by the way, 10 spots higher than that, 118 in the net at the moment. Brown is 8-5 on the season. They also are coming off a little bit of a COVID pause. They have not played a game since December 10th, so one day before the Georgetown game for Syracuse. They lost by 5 at home to Vermont, and they've had kind of some interesting games against some upper competition here. At UNC, they lost in a tight one, 94-87. Colorado, they lost by 2. They also played Creighton on a neutral floor and lost 78-57. So they're going to come into the Dome after playing some good competition, but they also are coming off a pause like Syracuse.
Yeah, 17 days. That's quite the layoff. And again, you always wonder how these teams are going to fare out of these pauses. And let's be honest, like last year, Brown didn't have a pause. I guess they did, but it was a whole season-long pause, right?
Yeah.
But Syracuse has kind of been through this before now. And I think that's important with these sort of unorthodox things that teams get sprung on because of the times we're living in right now. And hopefully Syracuse learned something from last year. And we're not going to see the same sort of struggles where they lose a bunch of games against inferior competition out of these pauses. Again, Brown is an inferior opponent. You should be able to take care of them. And even though they're a little bit better than some of the teams that maybe you were expecting to play during the little 2-game tune-up right before you get into ACC play, this is still a team that you should be able to take care of and win by double digits.
Yeah. It's an interesting team because you think of Ivy League, you think, okay, they're probably going to take care of the basketball and they're going to run sort of methodical offense maybe, and they'll have shooters maybe, and maybe not great athletes, but Brown is sort of unique in the Ivy League. I was reading 3-Man Weave's right up on them, and they did a good job of describing how they're not your typical Ivy League team because they do have athletes. They do want to play physical. They do have size, which that part does scare me a little from a Syracuse perspective because you're coming off the pause, and we've seen teams come out and just be a little bit more physical than Syracuse in the first half, going to the glass, getting rebounds. Jesse Edwards in particular maybe hasn't really stood up against the more physical teams. So that's going to be a test for Syracuse, even though it is an Ivy League opponent and you got 2 Ivy League teams in a row here. I think this Brown team does have some athletes that, watching back their games, they're not great. I mean, I'm not saying they're like should be playing at a higher level. They don't have a ton of talent maybe, but they have athleticism and switchability and kind of a little bit more than maybe you'd think for an Ivy League type school.
Right. And another thing you brought up too was the turnovers and taking care of the ball. Like that's kind of a stereotypical thing of the Ivy League, but this is a team that can be pretty careless with the basketball too. They're 300th in KenPom on non-steal turnover percentage. So what does that tell me? That tells me that's a team that is throwing the ball out of bounds, maybe some traveling, some 3-second violations. It's stuff that really is their own mistakes as opposed to teams creating a little bit of havoc. And Syracuse and zones are teams that try to create havoc. And that mixed with the fact that this is a Brown team that really isn't great at taking care of the basketball could be a recipe for success for Syracuse. Because again, one way for Syracuse to win basketball games this year is by limiting the number of possessions in games. When you have a ton of possessions, you're going to give the other team a lot more chances to hit threes and a lot more second chance opportunities. That is going to hurt the Syracuse team throughout the season. But if you're limiting those possessions and getting some of those turnovers, even if they're unforced errors, that's certainly going to be something that Syracuse can thrive off of.
I'm glad you brought up the turnovers because, that's been something that I've been keeping an eye on for Syracuse. And I feel like that's a big difference in this year's 2-3 zone. So this is a good opportunity to exploit that. I will say Brown does force a lot of turnovers on the other end. So their turnover margin is actually still better than Syracuse, but they do give the ball up. And Syracuse right now, 136th in the nation in turnover margin. You look at last year, they were 40th. The year before that, 33rd. The year before that, 26th. So it's a big drop-off in that category, and it has been a tougher schedule, but now you get an opportunity to maybe sort of swing that back in your favor against some Ivy League schools here. This is where I'd like to see them establish the length in the 2-3 zone, coming off some practice time here, really force some turnovers against a team that is capable of coughing the basketball up.
Right. Just take advantage of mistakes. That's what you have to do against these lesser competition throughout the season. That you need to take advantage of mistakes. That's how you're going to win these sort of basketball games. By the way, speaking of Brown, is Brown like the lowest rung on the Ivy Leagues? Like, is Brown like just scraping into the Ivy League when we're talking about, like, if you're applying to schools? I'm not talking about from an athletic standpoint. I'm talking about from an academic standpoint. Is Brown like the lowest on the totem pole of these in your eyes?
Maybe. I don't know. I just don't know enough because I was so far away from Ivy League consideration in college that, like,
I didn't apply to
Brown
a single Ivy
to me
myself.
is still a pipe dream, you know?
Yeah. Like,
and I know
I'm trying to think
some
of
really smart people that still got denied from Brown in high school. That makes me think, gosh, if that's the lowest of the low, you know, but I don't know, Dartmouth, what else is like even in the consideration?
I think Dartmouth, there's prestige to Dartmouth. The other one I was thinking is Columbia. Is Columbia?
Oh, I think Columbia is pretty high, right? See, I don't know. This is not, I study college basketball, not Ivy League admission rates prestige. And all that.
Yeah.
But
I feel like Brown's the one that it's like, where'd you get in? Brown. And it's like, oh, it's just kind of like an eye roll. Like, oh, I got into an Ivy, but it was Brown.
Right.
Like, oh, okay.
And there's someone listening that's like, you guys went to Syracuse and you're, attacking people at Brown. But I do think it doesn't feel like an Ivy as much as the Cornells and the Harvard and Yale. There's a certain, Princeton. When I think Ivy League, I don't think Brown. I'll say that. Right. So I guess I'm kind of
exactly. With you. No, I'm totally, that's exactly the way I look at it too. And again, we went to Syracuse, all right? We're not the sharpest tools in the shed either, but whenever you get a chance to punch down on the Ivy Leagues, you always go for it.
Yeah.
So we are the Harvard of Central New York, though, according to Sean McDonough. Yes,
as Sean McDonough likes to say. That's a good way of putting it, right? I always get a kick out of that, but it's an interesting matchup. I think they don't shoot the 3-ball great, looking at that 33%, but they do get to the boards decent, tied for 90th in rebound margin. Again, it goes back to what I was saying. Most Ivy League teams, you think we just beat up on them in terms of size and athleticism and on the boards, but this is not your typical Ivy League team. And the way that Mike Martin, who's been there for a while now, he's been there 10 years, he likes his teams to get to the glass and sort of play a different style of offense. It's not methodical. It's not great. I mean, usually they're defensive minded. So I do think Syracuse's defense is going to be able to limit them somewhat, but they got to get to the rebounds here. Like, Brown's a team that could out rebound them.
Yeah. The one thing that I think Syracuse has going in its favor is that one of Brown's best rebounders, Tamanong Cho, is 6'5". So that's something that, okay, you could have Buddy box his ass out, right? Like that, right. You have a height advantage with your guards over this guy. Now, we've seen in the past, don't let height be the end-all be-all for Hart to rebound, because we saw last year one of Syracuse's best rebounders was a guard. It was Alan Griffin.
How about Aminu Mohammed? He was, 6'6", and that was last game. Yeah.
So don't let it be the only tool that you're using to pick out, what can make an effective rebounder, but just know that you've got some 7-footers. You should be able to control someone who is 6'5".
Yeah. All right, we'll get into the BetOnline.ag spread and pick the game in just a second, plus our prop shop picks. But BetOnline does have you covered this holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Football continues its march towards the college bowl season and the pro football playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to their website or use your mobile device to sign up today. Receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use promo code LOCKEDON to receive that 50% welcome bonus. Basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, even your favorite Vegas casino games are all over there. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 and 2022 season, because we're coming up on that. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports, so don't wait to take advantage of those amazing offers. BetOnline, where the games start. We'll pick the BetOnline.ag spread in just a second, but let's dive into the prop shop here. And all these lines, pretty much all of them, are coming courtesy of PrizePicks. They've got 4 PrizePicks player prop sort of scoring over-unders that you can go to prizepicks.com and bet on. Use our promo code as well, Locked On. But starts out with Buddy Boeheim. They're over-under they're setting for him 17.5. He's another guy that had COVID second time around. So I'm a little hesitant to go over because he's a shooter. He's a guy that the more that you're practicing, the more rhythm you get, it helps you. And we saw what it did to him last year. But I do think this COVID pause is a little bit different than last year. One, they've gone through it. And two, you'd like to think, given the amount of practice time, getting back to the gym on the 23rd, I believe, that's a decent amount of time here before this game.
Yeah, I'm with you. Listen, this is a tough number for me, 17.5. Like, he could obliterate this and go for 25. He could also really struggle. Like, and again, leading into that pause, he was struggling. And so maybe that's the thing that he needed. Like, get that little break in there to help yourself out a little bit and then come out of the pause guns a-blazing. So, you know what? I'll roll with the over here on Buddy Boeheim. 17.5 is certainly an attainable number. And like, he could go out and hit his first 3 threes and put this thing away pretty easily from then on.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm going to take the slight over on 17.5. Next PrizePicks line here. Joe Girard over under 14.5 points in this game. I'll take the under on Joe. I do think in general, I'm probably leaning more towards a lower scoring game. We'll pick the over under from betonline.ag at the end, but I feel like two teams coming off a COVID pause, there might be some rust early. And they do have some athletes that can guard pretty tight on Joe, some 6'4", 6'5" guards. So I'll take the under on 14.5.
I'm going to take the over on Joe, actually. I think this pause is going to be something that's sort of good for him just to mentally reset. He's had some tough performances in terms of he's playing well, but the team's not. And I think that may be weighing on him a little bit right now because he doesn't want to be labeled as sort of that empty calories sort of player that you see get thrown around in the NBA a lot. I think this is a game where Joe's going to come out and he's going to be trigger happy. He's going to want to go out there and get a lot of shots up really quick, for better or for worse. But I think he's going to be out there. He's going to be one of the more active people in terms of a shots volume in this game. So I'll take the over. I'm not saying it's going to be overly efficient, but I think he will get to that over 14.5.
Cole Swider's over under 12.5. I will go slight over. I think I talked about how when we were doing the original preview for the Lehigh game that ended up not really mattering, I said this is maybe a game that he breaks out because it's against that type of competition that we saw him play really good against in the early season tune-up games, the exhibition type games. It's a little different now because now I know that he did have COVID and he was a guy that did miss the practice time as well. So I'm a little more hesitant, but I will take the slight over there at 12.5.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slight under here. And again, this is, I think, just going to come down to volume. I think Cole maybe he has a tough practice here or there leading into this game. And he says, okay, I'm going to try to impact this game in other ways. How can I rebound more? How can I go out there and facilitate a little bit more? How can I find those teammates? How can I play better defense? I think he's going to be maybe a little bit more focused in on those sort of aspects of the game, kind of like what he did early on in the season. Fallen.
Next up, Jesse Edwards over under 11.5 points from PrizePicks. I'm going to take the under actually because they have the defensive player of the year 2 years ago now because there wasn't a season last year in the Ivy League. Jalen Gainey, a 6'10 guy who's a really good shot blocker at center. And again, I think they have some physicality and some athleticism and some size that has given Jesse some problems in the past. So I'll take the under.
Yeah, I'm with you on the under here. Isn't it crazy, though, that we're getting a number that's in double figures for a Syracuse center? Like that, It's a good problem to sort of have right here. But I'm with you. I am going to roll with the under on this one. I just think this is a game where we might see Syracuse come out and try to shoot a lot of threes. Like really try to get going from three because they need to build some confidence with a lot of these guys.
Right, which I don't know after a COVID pause if that's the best strategy, but it's been their thing for the most part this year. That's what they are as an offense. They maybe haven't shot quite as much threes as I would have thought at the start of the year, but against type of teams like this, they should get clean looks. Cole Swider should get some transition looks that he hasn't been getting against these tougher teams, so maybe they'll be able to make some more than normal.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there.
All right, so leading into who will lead Syracuse in scoring. We do this every single week, and we'll go through the lines real quick. Buddy plus 125, Joe Girard plus 235, Jimmy plus 275, Cole Swider plus 350, Jesse plus 400. If you want to get risky, you can take Benny or an other at plus 1,000. We haven't talked much about Benny, but this is a big game for him. And I do feel like we hit on that a lot last week, how it's the type of game that I want to see him get some serious runs, some serious minutes here. But as for who I do think will lead Syracuse in scoring, I'll take a flyer on Jimmy at plus 275. Going against an Ivy League team, maybe has some background there. And we haven't really talked about him. PrizePicks did not give an over-under for him, but he's been great so far this year. And he's the type of guy that when the offense has been struggling at times, he's just been confident to take it over. So I think against an Ivy League type team, he could put up 19 or 20 points.
Yeah, that's good rationale behind that. I like that. He's definitely played against some of these guys at least. I'm going to roll with Joe here just because I think he's going to take the most shots in this game. And again, this is sort of a crapshoot here because who knows who's going to be crisp coming out of the pause, who's going to be a little bit sluggish, a little heavy-legged, all that stuff. But in my heart of hearts, I believe Joe is going to take the most shots because I think he's going to get out there, try to take command of this team, try to get things going on the right track early on and often in this game. So for that reason alone, I'm going to roll with Joe.
Time to pick the game now. Line from BetOnline.ag. Syracuse 9.5-point favorites at home against Brown, who is 128 in the net, 164 on KenPom. Over-under set at 143. I will take the under because I think off a COVID pause, we'll see a rusty start, probably a lower scoring first half that is pretty tight. I think Brown does have the physicality, the athleticism to hang with Syracuse, give them some fits on the boards. And their problem has been offense, but Syracuse's defense hasn't been able to stop many people so far. So I think Brown hangs with them in this game. I do think Syracuse wins, but I will take Brown to cover that 9.5.
I think I'm with you. I think it will go under in this game. Although I will say this, I think the second half is going to be much higher scoring than the first half.
I could see that,
game. I will take Syracuse to cover just because they've been through a pause before. Brown hasn't. And I worry more about that from a Brown standpoint than I do a Syracuse standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think this is hopefully going to be different. I mean, the Bryant game last year, I think they had like one practice before it. Then they jumped into it. It's all guys that, by all accounts, weren't as sick maybe as they were last year in the case of Buddy or Joe. And Jim Boeheim saying that no one really is exhibiting many symptoms, I think is encouraging for their ability to get back into a rhythm in this game. But it's a Brown team that you can't take lightly. I do think it's not what it was if it was Lehigh. You know, they still have to go out there and play a pretty good game here. And there's a reason why the line is 9.5. So for anyone that thinks it's going to be a pushover game, it could be tight at the half. We'll see. And Syracuse should ultimately win this game. But that is our Monday morning podcast for you guys. We'll be back with you guys Tuesday morning to recap the game. We thank you for making us your first listen every single weekday. We're here with you, the only place for daily SU pods. Check us out on Twitter. We'll be live tweeting the game at LO_Syracuse. And also check us out on YouTube. If you haven't already, the Locked On Syracuse YouTube page, go subscribe there as well. But thanks for listening today, and we'll be back with you guys to recap the game tomorrow.